Today I am making my apple turnovers. These are the perfect little either breakfast treat or snack, whatever you want to have them as. They're just perfection. The filling is what we'll be making. We'll be using store-bought puff pastry, but that filling is everything. It is so delicious. The apples are perfectly tender. The filling is moist, delicious, spiced, beautiful, delicious. Let's get started. So I have some puff pastry sheets here. There are 2 sheets that come in this box. I keep mine in the freezer until I'm ready for it. You do want it to be nice and cold, but flexible at the same time. So make sure that it's not completely frozen. So I have some apples here. Use any kind of apples that you want. I prefer an apple on the sweeter side. I know some people like to use Granny Smith apples. I prefer to use an apple that's on the sweeter side so I can use less sugar in my filling. Go ahead and use whatever apple you want. You're going to need about 3 large apples or 4 medium-sized apples or 5 small apples. So we're going to be using about 4 medium apples here. And I do have an apple corer. I just do not want to pull it out. So I'm going to just use my knife, which I already have here. So I'm just going to cut these up. As you can see, I am cutting them up. And then we're going to take these and cut them in about 1/2 inch chunks or so. You don't want them too big because these are going to be the filling inside of it and we don't want it too big. So I think 1/2 inch little squares is perfect. As I always do with my apple pies, I will be cooking this down a little bit. So it is in my saucepan here. And we're just going to add our ingredients to it. Super easy, straightforward. And you probably have all the ingredients on hand. So easy and perfect. So to our saucepan, I'm going to be adding in some brown sugar. You want to make sure and use brown sugar because it's got that molasses in there. It's going to give it extra flavor. So add in our brown sugar. I'll have the recipe amounts, either the link or the amounts down below in the description box for you. We're going to add in some ground cinnamon, as well as some vanilla extract. Some butter, either salted or unsalted, it doesn't matter. And then we will need the juice of a lemon. You're looking for about 2 tablespoons of lemon juice, which is typically about the juice of 1 lemon for me, unless it's like a really juicy lemon, but most of the times it's about 1 lemon. So I'm going to take this over to our stovetop. And again, I always like to cook my apples whenever I'm making any kind of apple filling because it just gets the apple to the perfect consistency that you want. You don't want a sharp bite. You just want it to be nice and tender. So on medium heat, I'm just going to give everything a nice stir. We want to make sure that that cinnamon is thoroughly mixed in, the brown sugar and everything is just give it a really good stir. Take about a minute just to make sure everything is mixed in. I'm using a small saucepan here. I could have used a bigger one, but the small one worked out perfectly because, again, the apples are cut into small pieces. So it makes it easier to get everything stirred around. So after we have given that a really good mix, I'm going to get my lid. Again, my heat is on medium heat. We're going to cover this and let this cook for about 1 to 2 minutes. Now, if you've watched my apple crumble recipe or my apple pies or anything like that, the apples are cut a little bit bigger, but because these are smaller chunks, we're going to let it go for about 1 to 2 minutes. After about 2 minutes or so, all that liquid has rendered out, the butter is melted, the sugar is starting to melt, everything. We've got this glorious sauce at the bottom, and that is going to be coating our apples. Oh, so good. So good. So we've given everything a nice mix. We've got all that glorious sauce at the bottom. I'm going to add in some all-purpose flour to this, and that is going to help thicken this up and make it a perfect consistency for our turnovers. You're going to need 1.5 tablespoons of flour, which is a perfect amount for me because you still get this amazing just consistency of the apple. It's still moist. It's still coated in that lovely sauce, but it's not oozing everywhere, especially in a turnover. So we're going to mix this around, make sure that all of that flour is incorporated. You don't want to see any white of the flour, so mix it until all the white is completely dissolved or disappeared. You don't see any of it anymore. And then you just want to turn your heat off. And that's it. That is how simple this is. As you can see, glorious, okay, if I may say so myself. These are so good for like a delicious, like snacky breakfast treat, or like a snack after lunch or dinner, whatever it may be. It's just perfection. This is so easy to make at home. Once you have the puff pastry, you can even make your own puff pastry, which I have done before. But let's be real, like I don't have time for that. So yeah. So I have 1 egg here. I'm just going to mix it up really quickly. And I'm going to dust my surface with some flour. Now my apple filling has set aside to cool. We don't want to use piping hot filling on our puff pastry because again, we want our puff pastry to retain as much of that cold temperature as possible. You don't want it to be frozen because it's very easy to crack, but you don't want it to be room temperature or anything like that. So what I like to do is get a rolling pin when it's really cold still and roll it out. That way it doesn't break on me. It becomes a little bit more flexible and pliable to work with, but it still is very cold. Using the rolling pin kind of helps that. And I like to stretch it out just about 1 inch or so. Again, it just makes it a little bit easier to work with. So I take my rolling pin and I just roll that out. So all the creases works out perfectly. I'm going to use my pizza cutter here and cut this into 4ths. And each square is going to fold over and turn itself over into a triangle. And we're going to be filling the inside. Now, they do have different types of like these puff pastry sheets. This is the Pepperidge Farm one that I'm using. I do know that they do want to have one that is already rolled out. So it's just one big sheet. So you wouldn't necessarily need to roll that out if that was it. Also have some cane sugar that we're going to be using towards in the end. And a little cup of water. The water is going to use as a glue. We're just going to very lightly brush some on using the tip of my finger to brush some on the sides so it acts as a glue to keep our pastry sealed as best as possible. Press it down. We're going to use the tip of a fork to seal the edges of our puff pastry here. And you just want to make like a little hole in the center to make sure any steam escapes. Now you will have some spillage. I always have some spillage every time I make turnovers. It doesn't matter how well I seal it, how big of a space that I make for the steam to come out of, and it's fine. It doesn't matter. It's just as delicious anyways. So as you can see, I'm putting my filling in the center and I'm folding it over itself to make a triangle, using a little water as glue, and then making a little incision. You want to make sure that the water does not get all over the puff pastry. You want to make sure the puff pastry is still as dry as possible. So that's why I'm wiping my counter as needed to make sure no water goes and makes it soggy. You don't want a soggy puff pastry. You want it to be dry and crisp, but we just want a little tiny bit just for some glue. After we finish, you want to make sure your oven is already preheated to 400 degrees. Get that oven preheated before you even start filling these up. Preheat your oven to 400 degrees before filling these up. I should have said that before, but I'm saying it now. Give it a very light coating with some egg wash that it was just a beaten up egg there. A very light coating. You don't want this to be too eggy or too strong in flavor, or you don't want it to burn too much because it's going to be baking for about 30 to 35 minutes at 400 degrees. So just a very light bit of egg wash. Some people even like to use milk on the top. I think I've used the milk before. I still prefer the egg wash. And then we're going to sprinkle it with some of that cane sugar, a generous amount of cane sugar on top, because I like that crunch. When you buy turnovers from the store, if it's nice and fresh, that is, it's got a really nice crunch to it. The puff pastry itself is nice and puffed up and crunchy, but that sugar on top gives it that extra flaky, crunchy bit that you want. And that's it. It's going to bake for about 30 to 35 minutes, and you can serve as is or dust some powdered sugar on it. Let's be real, a little bit of dusting of powdered sugar is always delicious. These are so amazing, guys. You really got to give it a try. It's so easy to do because, I love to do pancakes. I love to do waffles. I love to do eggs and all these different things for breakfast. But sometimes having something a little different, a little extra special just goes a long way. I hope you enjoy it. I'll see you next time. Bye-bye.